Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Loose Framing Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Martin Olich, and joining me is the not Grammy Award nominated PR manager,
Jesse Brock.
Hello, Jesse.
Hello. I have not been nominated for a Grammy.
No, which will become clear later on. Not that you didn't. Never mind. Neither of us are musicians, sadly. But why is that relevant?
I'm a mean singer when it comes to karaoke.
Are you?
Oh, yeah.
Well, should we put that to the test right now?
No.
No, I didn't think so. Well, we have a great show coming up today.
We do. It's with Chris Dudley, who is the keyboardist for the band Underoath, which is a huge name in the Tampa Bay area.
It is a Grammy-nominated band.
Yes, they are.
It's going to be a really cool show, I think. We've got a great guest with Chris Dudley. You know, he's done everything from being a touring band for 20 plus years,
right,
nominated for a Grammy. But he's also scored, tons of video games and several movies.
Yep. Yeah, he actually reached out to us to connect. And when I started looking up his bio and stuff, I realized he's a big deal. So I was like, you need to be on our podcast.
Yeah. Not that we're big deals and they should be on our podcast.
Well, but, we're getting there with guests like this.
We certainly appreciate his participation, but it's going to be a good conversation, I think. We're going to be talking about his inspirations, the do's and don'ts of music scoring, but also just, where his headspace is at when he's actually talking and thinking about music, both for his touring band, but also, in composing film.
Yeah, and that transition from a touring rock band to film composing and the differences between the two.
Yeah. So with that, we'll keep it pithy because I think this one's going to go long. Be right back with Chris Dudley. Welcome back to the Loose Framing Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Martin Olich, and joining me now is Grammy Award-winning musician and composer, Chris Dudley.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm actually two-time Grammy losing.
Okay,
but
we'll redo the podcast.
No, we're keeping it. That's great. It's funny because I don't know if anybody knows this,
you guys
but
won
if
for
you
best music video, didn't you guys?
we were nominated.
Okay.
Yeah, but what's funny is if you're nominated but you lose, they send you these little like gold-plated like medals.
Thanks for trying.
Yes, exactly. And I've got them hanging up in my studio, just like next to like a keyboard, like on a little shelf. And my son came in the other day, and he was like playing with them, and he was like, what'd you do to win these? And I was like, well, I didn't really win. He was like, so you lost? And I'm like, well, they call it nominated, and he's like, well, why do they give you a medal if you lose? And but he's 5, and it was
participation
great.
Trophies for adults.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It was a little less
informed.
Well,
my apology. I will flog my research assistant.
Oh no, I love it. Yeah.
The research assistant is me, by the way. That was what my Googling popped up. Shame on me. Well, we're going to dig into your band, Underoath. We're going to dig into your musical career, but I always like to start at the beginning just to frame this conversation of how you got to where you are now. You grew up in a small town. I did as well. I got as far as like remedial music class, and I had a music professor tell me that I should never touch an instrument again. I was that bad. And even though I've spent my entire life wanting to play an instrument, that scarred me to the point. I think I couldn't do "Mary Had a Little Lamb" on a trumpet, and they were like, "No, this is not for you. Move on."
Maybe wind instruments are.
Yeah, maybe that was it. So they put me they moved me over to percussion, and I ended up playing the triangle. So I was like slowly demoted
that's
down
like an
through
insult.
everything until I was there. So with my tragic backstory aside, how did you pick up an instrument, and how did that lead you to joining a band?
So, I grew up in a really musical household in general, but there was nobody really playing music in my house other than my mom loved to play tambourine along to everything. So, I grew up just really appreciating all different types of music and just listen to music all the time. But, like you said, I grew up in a small town, and the idea of playing music was not really something on my radar. But, when I got to, almost being a teen into my early teens, I, gravitated toward a lot of heavy music, and I wanted to try to learn how to play guitar. And I told my mom that, I wanted to play guitar. So she told me that she would buy me an acoustic guitar, and then if I stuck with it, she would buy me an electric. And she did, and I did, and she did. So I, worked my way to an electric guitar. It was like this really awful like Yamaha guitar. And then she bought me a little amp that had a distortion button on it, and I thought that was really cool. So I was just trying to learn these songs from bands that I listened to, and that was really the beginning of it. And then it, that I just kind of fell into doing keyboard from there.
Yeah.
I was in high school, and I was a sophomore, and I had a friend that was in a band, and they were looking for a keyboard player, and I was like, well, I can play guitar. So
were you teaching yourself by ear, or could you actually read and write music?
No, it was all self-taught by ear, just like lots of rewind and playing on the tapes or CDs.
Now, when you're composing now, do you write your own music? I mean, actually.
No, I still don't read or write music, which is, I don't know.
It's not strange for a musician, but I think it might be strange for a composer.
Yeah. Like that's a skill that, one of many skills that I still want to learn. And, thankfully nowadays there's, you can work with with an orchestrator and, music editor, and, that can still get done. It's just, it's just not a skill that I have. And I think, that just comes from, the way that I started playing music. Like, it wasn't a formal thing. I never had any lessons. It was just me sitting down and trying to figure out how to do it. And then that just snowballed, and that's where I'm at now.
So, and forgive me, I don't know the full history of your band Underoath, but was that the first band you joined and it just grew? So that's got to be 20 years now.
Yeah. I started playing in Underoath when I was 16. And I will be 39 next year. So it's been, it's crazy because, it wasn't a thing that I was aspiring to do as a career. It was just, we were a band in high school, just friends playing music. And then it just snowballed. Like we were able to play like, we have a show on a weekend, to like, we've got 2 shows this weekend. And then, there's, a week-long string of shows this summer, and then it just, year after year of that, and then, releasing, just continuing to release albums, and then it just, we woke up one day and it was our career, which was crazy.
I mean, I can probably think of a couple bands off the top of my head, but there's not a whole lot that can say that they were a high school garage band that then transitioned into being a touring band at a national level, being nominated for Grammys and having that kind of longevity. What was like the first moment or tour or gig that you played where you actually thought to yourself, wow, this might be a career and this might be something that is going to take off?
I tend to point toward, we did this tour called the Warped Tour in 2004. We had done it 2 years prior as well, but in 2004 we released one of our albums called They're Only Chasing Safety, and it was released right at the start of that tour. And at that point, we were just playing on a small stage, and there's really nobody coming to see us. But that album kind of took off during that summer, so like we could see like every day there was literally just more and more people coming, and then by the end of that tour, like, we were playing on this little stage, but there was just a massive amount of people coming to the stage. So we were able to see this like progression that was happening there. And, by the end of it, they were, talking about like moving us to like different stages and all kinds of stuff. So that was a summer where I think we went from, just playing for fun / paying money to play to like, wow, like this is really like turning into something.
Yeah.
But it was also interesting because we were like insulated. Like we had heard about all this stuff that was happening on the outside with the record, and our label was saying things are going really well, but we were just on this tour that was basically in arena parking lots every day. So that was all that we were seeing for the whole summer. So that was a interesting time for sure.
We're going to transition here in a second to composing and TVs and movies and video games. But before we do you have a favorite tour memory in this long career?
Man, there's a lot. I mean, it's just, I've been touring for so long. We had this tour that we did back in 2013 middle of 2003. And we played this place called Alley Cats in Virginia. And that was the first time that we played where we heard people singing our music back to us. Like I'll never forget that. Like it was so loud that like it was like we couldn't hear ourselves because like the crowd was singing, and like that was something that, you know, even to this day is still crazy, but that was like the first time that it had happened. So I think that you know, that was super memorable. But I could just literally just go on for hours about tour stories.
That's a perfect story, actually. I was going to ask a question, which I'll ask now. It might be a little early in the conversation, but when you're composing for a movie or a TV series or even a video game, you don't have that audience interaction. I guess that's true for creating an album too. I mean, once it's out there in the world, you're not in everyone's living room as they're listening to you, but you're still touring with that music and you're able to get the audience feedback. You don't have that when you're composing. So where do you pull your energy or your creativity from without a live audience?
It's definitely a different process for sure. You know, one thing that was a big, one thing I learned real quick when I started doing stuff for anything outside of the band really was, it was a little daunting because the buck stopped with me. Like, you know, writing with a band, it's a collaborative process. And like, if I bring an idea to the table and, you know, three of the dudes are like, hey, that's kind of trash, I'm like, okay, great. Like, let's move on to the next thing. But like, if I'm, you know, working on a film and I'm just literally in my studio by myself for a month and a half, like there's not that like back and forth. It's literally just me writing this thing and hoping that it's good. So it's definitely different. I have an interesting, it's really a shortcoming, but I call it like a kind of a superhero trait as far as composers go, where like if I'm working on a piece, normally the next morning, if you ask me to like hum the thing that I was working on all night the night before, I can't really do it. I'm like, I know it was something like this, but I lose it real quick after I write it, which is good because then I can go back to it the next morning and kind of hear it objectively. Mm-hmm. So I would say, you know, probably 30% of the time I'll listen to something the next morning and just be like, oh, what was I thinking? Like, and that's good, you know, because I think as a creative in general, it's really hard to view or hear what you do objectively because you're just in your head and you're thinking about all the little nuances of it. So I'm very thankful that I have that ability to, even just after a day, be able to hear it objectively. You know, sometimes it takes longer, but you know, normally it's pretty quick. So I'm very thankful for that because that's kind of what I have to lean on when there's no immediate feedback. Yeah. You know.
So how did you transition from being a touring artist to being a composer and a music producer?
So, you know, I've always just been a nerd about film in general, a nerd about film music in general. You know, when we would go on, even still when we go on tour, if we have a day off, if I'm not working on a film, I'm at the movies. Like that's just my thing. And I went and saw, we were on tour actually, and we had a day off and everybody wanted to go, this is back in 2008. And everybody wanted to go see that movie Hot Rod. That was like, everybody was like super stoked to see that. And I just had zero desire to, I didn't know anything about it. I was just like, that doesn't look good. And me and merch guy for the band that we were on tour with went and saw, Danny Boyle had a new movie that had come out that I didn't know anything about called Sunshine. And I saw the poster and I saw that Danny Boyle directed. I was like, oh damn, like let's go see this. And that is that for me, I think was a really big turning point where I walked out of that theater thinking like, I want to do that. Like, because, you know, John Murphy's work, I had loved his, you know, what he had done in, you know, 28 Days Later and, you know, 28 Weeks Later. You know, and he's just done a ton of great stuff. But at that point, I basically knew him as like a guy who came from a rock background and transitioned into doing film. And when I saw Sunshine, granted, Underworld had, you know, a lot to do with that score as well, but that was his score. And I was really just like, that's what I want to do. Like, cause it just like was in me at that point. And it, you know, it wasn't for quite a few years after that I really started to take concrete steps. And really it came down to a conversation I had with my wife where we were watching something on TV. I don't remember what it was, but we were watching a movie, and I was like, man, that score is so good. And I was like, man, I'd love to do that one day. Like, that would just be so great. And she was like, well, why don't you just do it? And I was like, well, I don't have connections. I don't know. I've never done it before. Like, I don't know how. And she's like, well, why don't you just say that you're doing it and then go and, just do it and learn as you go. And it was like the next day I had put some stuff out on my social media things. In the way that I worded it was that I was opening up my studio for writing projects. So if anybody had, an album they were working on, or a short or a film or a video game or anything, and they wanted somebody else to write on it, to contact me. And it was really just a snowball from there. I did a lot of reading, a lot of learning, huge learning curve, because it's just a completely different beast than writing with a band. And thankfully, I had a director reach out to me about a short, and then I had another director reach out to me about a feature. And it was a lot of just like building the bridge as I was going across it.
Yeah.
That just snowballed to where I'm at now, which is crazy.
So it's funny you mentioned Sunshine. I watched that. I've seen it many times, but I watched it not too long ago. I was watching a bunch of horror movies for Halloween. And you're right, that soundtrack's like an earworm in your head. I mean,
it's amazing.
That penultimate scene when Cillian Murphy is about to ignite the machine at the end of it, and just that thrum that comes through is just, it chills.
Yes, I love John Murphy in general. Like he's the guy where I can look at him and be like, if it were not for what he does, like I would not be doing this. Like he's just so good. And I love that movie. Like there are not enough people that talk about that movie at all.
No, it was an underseen, underappreciated film.
Gosh,
for sure.
It's amazing. If you're listening to this and you have not seen Sunshine, don't read about it. Just watch it. I love it. My wife hates it too. She
really, I can think of a lot of friends that I've recommended it to. They didn't end up liking it, but I love it.
Yeah,
so.
She hates it for every reason that I love it, because she says it makes her feel like isolated and
that's
alone.
The point of the movie.
Exactly. So I'm like, so the
filmmaker
movie
did their job.
Exactly.
The composer of that film had a rock background, and not every composer was in a band or even aspired to have a band, but I think a lot of the good ones have been in a band or are still in a band. I mean, you think of John Carpenter, Danny Elfman, Nick Cave, some of the best still working today.
Johnny Greenwood.
Yeah, of course. Do you think your background, not just as a musician, but being in a band that toured, did that help your sensibilities as far as composing?
I think so, for sure. Specifically in that. Composing for film is you have to be able to disassociate yourself from what it is that you're working on. And I feel like a lot of people who get into music wanting to write for film, like, 'cause in general, when you're writing something, like, it's coming from inside of you, and it means something, and you put feeling into it and you put heart into it. And for somebody to say, that's not good, or that's not right, do it different, here's how I want it done, for a lot of people that's like crushing. And or like, I don't want to do that. But I think that being in a band that's specifically as collaborative as ours is, I've been told that since I was 16 years old. Like, but it's never been like, it's never come from a place other than like, hey, we can do better. Like, let's do something else. And, I'm also in that position with the other guys in the band where it's like, there's a drum part or guitar part, and I'm like, no, that's not it. Like, let's do something else. So I feel like that's helped me a lot, just to be able to have these discussions with producers and directors and not feel married to the things that I'm doing. Like I'm putting everything I have into it. But at the end of the day, if I work for a week on a piece and a director's like, hey, that's not the right vibe, it's a week that, you won't get back. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, great. Like, then we now have a starting point. Like, let's figure out what works and what doesn't, and we'll move from there. So yeah, I think that definitely helped out a lot.
So when you're composing for a film, and I'm assuming it's different, every project's different. Sometimes you might have the video in front of you. Sometimes maybe you're starting before they've even finished shooting. What is your process in understanding the scenes that you're scoring, and how much are you actually envisioning in your head as far as what the audience's expectations are at that moment? Like, yeah, I think everyone who's ever watched a film understands they're being manipulated by the music just as much as the video on the screen. But how much of the manipulation are you aware of as the composer and your need to manipulate the audience to get the scene to work?
So I don't know if I would even necessarily word it like that. Like, I'm very aware of what is the character feeling at this point. Like what, and and there are discussions of like, okay, like there's, say there's a reveal in this point, and I'll ask the director like, okay, like what is the audience to feel about this reveal? Like, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Like, and you do have to be very cognizant of that, because everybody knows, like, everybody can think of a movie they watched where it was like the score stuck out because it was either too on the nose or it was like just completely off. So I don't spend a ton of time thinking about that, but at the end of the day, the entire process of putting music to a film is to get the emotion across that the director is intending with what's on screen. Sometimes that takes more work than others. Like, I've worked on projects where I guess I'll say what's going on screen doesn't match what the director is saying they want, as far as this is a funny part, and I'm like,
it's not funny.
Yeah. So then there's times when that'll happen where they'll kind of lean on the music and be like, okay, well, now this has to be like a funny thing, or this has to be a scary thing. But I think that you can do a lot there. Like, there's a lot that can be done. Like, if, say for instance, if you have a scene where a character is just sitting at a table looking directly at the camera and the camera is zooming in, you could do 50 different things with music that would make that same exact shot feel 50 different ways. Yeah. And so it's sometimes it's a tightrope walk, but that's part of it,
So your answer is going to be subjective on this, but I always wonder, is a memorable score a bad score? And what I mean by that, does the music overshine the movie? You could ask 50 people to hum the theme song from Jurassic Park or Jaws, and they could do it no problem. Mm-hmm. Ask them to verbatim explain a scene that they saw in the movie, they probably can't. Mm-hmm. So did, in that case, the score outshine the movie, and is that a bad thing in your opinion?
I can say personally that there are no bad scores that I could hum anything to. Yeah. Personally. But I think that, I guess my answer to that would be no. Like, I don't think that those end up being, those necessarily overshine the picture. I feel that those moments where the score and the picture do exactly what they're supposed to, that's when you have that magic, and you're just like, oh, like, you think about you're talking about Jurassic Park. Like, as soon as I hear that theme, I think of, the Brontosaurus, and I think of like the helicopter flying. And like, to me, when I hear a score replayed, from a great movie, like I see the movie in my head. So in that instance, it's perfect, because it completely takes me back. Talking about Sunshine, the score for Sunshine has been used in so many other things, and it bugs the crap out of me because when I hear that score, I'm in that movie, that it takes me back there. So in that sense, I think it's perfect. But, again, subjective.
That's interesting you brought that up. The bad ways you can use a score or a song. And I'm going to ask you, advice for first-time filmmakers or short filmmakers and how they score their own films. But, I've always been under the assumption that you probably shouldn't use music, whether it's a band playing or composed music, in your film that's been used before, because all you're doing is referencing that movie and you're immediately taking the audience out of it. For example, you can remember, we're both similar ages, the first time you heard, Nevermind, or a Rolling Stones album or whatever it might be, you're going to remember what you were feeling the first time you heard that song. Mm-hmm. No matter what the filmmaker is trying to convey, you've immediately taken the audience out because they're thinking about something else.
Yeah, I think that that's true the majority of the time. I do think that there are times when, specifically if you're doing something lower budget, or you don't really have resources, maybe reusing some score that you heard somewhere else. Like if it's not something that's like crazy recognizable,
Right.
I would say the majority of the audience might not get like, oh, this is from like this other thing. But then again, there are times when a song, like a licensed song, is used in a film and it's used so well that overshadows maybe what came before it in your head. But I think that tends to only happen in great films. Like it doesn't happen in some random film you're seeing at a afternoon screening that you don't know what it is. Like, so I would normally advise against doing that unless what you're doing is just a genius and people don't know it yet. Like I think of, some ways that Cameron Crowe used Beach Boys stuff where I'd heard those same songs 100 times in 100 different things, but then once he used it, like, I'm thinking of like the way that he used Good Vibrations of Vanilla Sky. Mm-hmm. That is now, whenever I hear Good Vibrations, that's like an uncomfortable song to hear,
Sure.
in a good way, So yeah,
Sure, like Steelers Wheel. After you've watched Reservoir Dogs, you're never going to hear that song again.
But again, for me, Vanilla Sky I think is brilliant. Reservoir Dogs is brilliant. Yeah. Like it's those brilliant, some of the way that Scorsese will use songs, or Quentin Tarantino. But again, look at the guys we're talking about Cameron Crowe and Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese. So it's like those are the guys that can take a known thing and like twist it, but that's really hard to do, I think.
So you've got a couple of projects in the works, God's Waiting Room, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but you just had your most recent film, as far as I know, that just came out and is available online for streaming, is a horror anthology called Bad Candy. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about what makes a great horror soundtrack, what makes a great horror composition, because music is inextricably connected with the scares, right? You really got to elevate the scene and punch through whatever the horror is. So talk about what inspirations you pulled from and just what your thinking was going into scoring that film.
So, yes, a lot of horror does lean on score. I think so much of the time it's dependent on where there is not score, because I think, you can easily overdo score anywhere, I think, especially in horror. But I guess my personal inspirations for that one in particular, because, there's a couple different, there's some scenes where, it's focusing on like kids in Halloween and what that feels like. Because in general, the director, when we first got started with that, said, I want this film to sound like what Halloween felt like when you were 10 years old. And for me, I was thinking of
that's an awesome inspiration, by the way.
Yeah. And when I heard that, I immediately thought, Danny Elfman, John Carpenter stuff, and more recently, the stuff that Disaster Piece did with It Follows. I loved that, and I felt like that was kind of like the realm that the whole thing should sit in. But it's interesting with influences though, because I feel like if you're an artist and you sit down and you're like, I'm going to write something like this, after you're done with it, for me anyway, 9 times out of 10, like if somebody might not pick up on that unless I was like, hey, like I took inspiration from this thing, they'd be like, oh yeah. Like, yeah. So, it was all run through my filter of what I like and what I don't like. But yeah, so the process for scoring that was interesting though, because I got brought on really early, like basically in the script phase for that. And I wrote I want to say I wrote like 20 cues for that before I had even seen a frame. And I got sent a rough edit of the film, and I knew immediately that I had missed the mark on what I needed to be writing. And I was like, oh yeah, none of this is going to work. Like I need to start over, and I did. So I have a whole folder of stuff that I never ended up using from that. But
is that disheartening when something like that happens, or is that just cutting through the clarity and saying, okay, well, I know this doesn't work, so that's a baseline. We can move on from there.
The latter, yeah. But I also look at it as I now have 20 something cues that are in a folder that I could probably use for something in the future.
Yeah.
So it's not like I wasted all that time. It was just like, okay, we now know that that's not it. I'll file that away for later. Working with Scott Hansen and Desiree Connell, and that was awesome because they just tended to like everything I was doing, which at times was a little scary because
you want some pushback. Every once in a while.
Like I want, like if I'm sending 10 minutes of music, like I'm ready for like a page of notes to come back, and then so many times like I would just get a text from Scott, be like, "Yo, that's dope. All right, move on," and I'm like, wait, really? Nothing? No notes or anything? And I'm thankful they were easy to work with. But it was fun. I had a good time with it, and it was cool.
So you have a newer project than Bad Candy coming out called God's Waiting Room. All Florida crew, if I'm not mistaken, are very close to it.
Yeah.
It was shot in the greater Tampa Bay area. What was that process like? And we'll get into just living in Florida in general here in a second, but what can you say about just the Florida crew and the creativity that comes out of this area?
So what's cool about a lot of the crew for that is we all kind of grew up in this area, and me and the director in particular, we have we've known each other basically since our late teens, early 20s. We all grew up in like the Tampa hardcore music scene, and just going to shows, and so we have a very similar like grasp on what the Tampa area is and what it has to offer. And a lot of the crew as well grew up in this area in a very similar fashion. So in that sense, it was like everybody was kind of on the same page on what this was gonna be. And so when the director Tyler Riggs had approached me about scoring it, I was like, oh dude, of course, because me and him had worked together on a short that he had done before God's Waiting Room, and that was a lot of fun. So it was like a no-brainer. And when we were sitting down to figure out what we wanted the score to sound like, a big thing was what does Florida sound like because we knew it was just the entire film was going to be dripping Florida, like that's what we wanted. And really what I had decided on was like very like we wanted it to feel like humid, and we had said like window air conditioning units, cicadas, all those things are that's what we felt like Florida sounded like. And then like I wanted a lot of like very wet reverby synths, very reverby guitars, like very just wet everything. And I think that it turned out awesome. Like I'm very, very pumped on it.
So Florida itself was an inspiration for this.
Oh, it's the inspiration for it. Yeah, 100%. And when you watch it, you'll see it for sure. Like it's just, it's it follows a young woman growing up in a young girl growing up in Florida and just kind of being over it. And I think that if you grow up anywhere, you kind of at some point you come to that spot where you're just like, I need to get the hell out of this place. And, I think Florida is a great backdrop for that. It's because, it's a lot of people come here to retire. So, if you're a young person in Florida, sometimes it can seem like you're
in God's waiting room.
Yes, 100%. And, it deals with that. And, I think it has a very definitive vibe to it.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And Florida does have a vibe to it. And you look at like what Sean Baker did with Florida Project. I mean, there's so much creativity and richness in Florida that I don't think people lean on enough. But let's just bend that creativity more towards music and your influences that have pushed you in your career. You mentioned going to hardcore shows here in Tampa Bay. And even though we did a spotlight, and for those listening, reference our Morris Sound spotlight, but hardcore metal music was birthed in Tampa Bay. I mean, it really is where the epicenter for that was for a long time. So what was it like going to those early shows in Tampa, and what musicians were kicking around when you were thinking of joining a band, or at least being influenced by music that you saw here in Tampa?
No matter what it is that you're doing, in later in life, formative years, like, teenage years, are going to be such an important part of whatever that is. And I'm just super thankful that mine was with the group of friends that I had in this scene, because I think that it informed so much of like who I became as a person. Like, excuse me, back then, we were going and seeing, there's a band called Sleeping by the Riverside. We go and see them all the time from the area. Like mostly bands from the area. Sleeping by the Riverside, Yeti, Chalice, Culture was from Southern Florida, Strong Arm. But then there was a band called Seventh Star. But then bands will come in from out of state. Like I remember this band from Europe came called Extol, who we all really loved. We went and saw them, and a band called Blindside. They did a little thing around Florida, and we went and saw them. So all those bands like just really informed who we were at the time, and I think by default who we became. And there was a super strong sense of for lack of a less cheesy term, like brotherhood, and like we felt like we were all really in this thing, but at the same time it was all very positive. Like it wasn't like a gang thing. It was just like weird, like we had these friends that we loved, and we got to go and experience heavy music together, and so many of us played heavy music as well, and it was just this camaraderie. And we carry that even till now. Like me and the director of God's Waiting Room, we went up because Underoath played a show in Alabama a few weeks back, and he came up, and there were all these other bands playing that we were both super stoked on, and we were just like in the crowd, be like, "Oh, this is cool."
Yeah.
We're in our late 30s now, and it's cool.
So we're running out of time here, but I do want to talk a little bit about just living in Tampa Bay, the greater Tampa area. You're from Brooksville. You've spent a lot of time touring. You've seen a lot of towns, a lot of cities, a lot of places. Why Florida, and why the Tampa Bay area? Like, why did you settle here?
So I moved to the general area when I was 9, and I moved out of state a couple times, but just kept coming back. And it's really sometimes hard to put a finger on, but so much of it just comes down to this just being home. And there's a real good case to be made for me to move to LA, and we've thought about it before, but for me, the quality of life that I'm able to have here, and the type of life we're able to have here, because we've got our property and my studio's out there, and our family's here, and our friends are here, and it's a specific vibe that's here. Just the people. I think it's part of just being in the South. It's a lot different. All of that to me is worth whatever projects I'm going to miss out on not being here. There are a handful of things that I have not gotten because I'm not in LA, and I'm like, I'll take it. This is just home for us. Like our people are here. All of my family for the most part, my wife's whole family for the most part, all of our close friends. The people, the kids that our kids are growing up with, that they have known since they were infants, are all here. So it's just, this is just our place. And if at some point I'm forced to move out of here, I will. But if I'm not, then I don't ever see us going anywhere. Yeah. So,
well, let's wrap it up here. It's been just a delight talking with you.
Same.
You've got Bad Candy, which is streaming right now. Mm-hmm. You've got, which I encourage everyone to watch. I know Halloween season's long past us at this point, but it's a great little horror anthology.
Thanks.
You've got God's Waiting Room coming out. Do you have a release date in that yet?
We don't have a release date on that yet, no. And I also have a movie called Whelm that's out right now streaming as well. That's like a Depression era thriller, which is really cool.
And Underoath has a brand new album coming out.
Yes, in January. I think January 14th.
Are you guys going to go on tour with that?
Yeah. We're doing a tour the end of February into March, and we're actually ending the tour in Janus live in St. Pete.
That's fantastic. I will definitely come out for that.
Yeah, very
right
pumped
downtown
on
St.
that.
Pete, and I walk on over.
Oh, nice.
We are at the end of our time, unfortunately. You've been listening to Chris Dudley, Grammy nominated.
Two-time Grammy losing.
Two-time Grammy losing musician, composer. Chris, where can people find more about you? What's your social media handles?
I am at Chris Underoath on Instagram and Twitter, and I am super easy to reach. I like to hang out on there. My Facebook is private, so I don't add people on there, but my website is chrisdudleymusic.com.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening. We'll be right back in just a second. Chris, it was a pleasure, man.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back to the Loose Framing Podcast. Joining you again is Tyler Martinovich, and to my
Jesse
right.
Brock. What's up?
Well, that was a fun conversation.
It was really fun. Yeah, I geeked out a little bit.
Yeah. I've never interviewed a composer before, and I was struggling just to think of like what questions, but I just felt like that was an awesome conversation.
I was kind of starstruck a little bit. He's done some big things.
He has done some really big things.
Yeah.
I've never been nominated for a Grammy before.
Right?
And your beatboxing certainly hasn't been nominated.
Not yet.
Yet. I should have framed that as yet. One of the standouts for me was just the creativity that Florida itself inspires. And I think that's true. I mentioned Sean Baker, Florida Project in the interview. But then also, Chris had just finished working on his latest film, God's Waiting Room, and that was entirely, birthed out of whole cloth from just the Florida scene, both the crews, the writing, the inspiration, all
When
of
he's talking about the inspiration, I was like goosebumps when he was talking about the wet noises and the cicadas and.
Well, and anyone who's ever been to Florida, as soon as he mentioned those things, the window unit air conditioner and just that horrible drippy sound that it always has.
If you grew up in Florida, you're like, oh yeah,
you know it
he's
instantly.
Spot on.
So one of the questions that came up, or actually I think it just came out of our conversation, was that what inspired him originally to consider going into music scoring was the soundtrack from Sunshine.
Yeah.
Which I've seen Sunshine a million times.
I have not seen Sunshine.
It is an awesome, awesome film, and it's got an awesome score to it, a memorable one at that.
Right. But the composer he was talking about was John Murphy, and I looked it up. He's done Slumdog Millionaire, and he most recently did The Suicide Squad, the new one with John Cena, which is a pretty memorable score itself. It's kind of like edgy and gritty.
I didn't know that. I think he's mostly worked he's primarily worked with Danny Boyle, who was also the director, who did Slumdog Millionaire, but also Sunshine. 28 Days Later, a bunch of other films.
Yeah, but anyways, when he was talking about that, it kind of got me thinking about this game I like to play where I guess the composer, and I usually get it 100% right when it's Thomas Newman, because Thomas Newman has this very distinct, it's a piano. It's always a piano sound. So I was in the theater watching 1917 2 springs ago, and when I heard it, I was like, Thomas Newman, Act 1, Thomas Newman. And as soon as the credits rolled, I was like, I was right.
I can usually do that with Danny Elfman scores.
Yeah.
It's very Danny Elfman-y.
Well, when he's Tim Burton, it's very quirky and, but then when he does The Simpsons, it's a little different,
Okay, I'd still say I could nail it.
You probably can.
Who did you say? Something?
Thomas Newman?
Thomas Newman? Who is Thomas Newman?
He's Randy Newman's brother.
So the lesser-known Newman.
The lesser-known Newman. Yeah, actually, I think the Newmans are a whole family.
Right,
but
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
I don't know.
Learning new things on the podcast.
Thank you, Google.
So we reached out to our Instagram audience to see what some of their favorite soundtracks were.
Yes.
Some inspiration there. Jesse, what are your favorite soundtracks?
Well, I would be remiss if I did not mention Hans Zimmer with both Pirates of the Caribbean.
I can remember it, and I don't want to. Thanks.
Just in case you didn't know.
Yeah, no, that'll be stuck in my head the rest of the day.
And The Lion King, do you, on your Spotify, when you just play your liked songs, do you have composers come up on your liked songs?
No, I do not.
Because I have Simba is Alive by Hans Zimmer, and I have Ray's Theme from the new Star Wars by John Williams, and it consistently comes on my Spotify. And I'm like, I'm not changing it, guys.
I think the new Star Wars films probably have the most unmemorable soundtrack
They're
of
still
any
epic.
of the Star Warses.
I mean, yeah.
Other than the scores that were borrowed from the previous
But
films.
it's still
that they,
John Williams.
I'm not saying John Williams is amazing. He is.
It's polished and it's good.
Okay.
But I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it just
the nostalgia's
yeah.
definitely in the OG3.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Indiana Jones,
Well, yeah, of course.
Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not saying he's a bad composer. He's amazing. It's I don't know. I disagree with you on the
on the one that I chose.
The race theme. Yeah, there's a lot better songs you could have
Whatever.
picked. So other than that, what other movies do you remember the scores from?
What movies do you remember the scores from?
Come on, you remember like Jaws
Oh, yeah.
or the Halloween soundtrack.
John Carpenter.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Legend.
Yes.
Yep.
I mean, John Carpenter's soundtrack for The Thing is amazing, even though they gave the credit to Ennio Morricone.
Did they?
He did not like the soundtrack, so he scored it himself. And then Tarantino ended up using that discarded soundtrack for The Hateful Eight.
I did not know that. Oh,
Yes.
my God.
There you go.
Wow.
Some
Fun fact.
random
We're learning
film
so much.
trivia here. I don't know. I like a lot of like synthy, but very subtle.
Like synthwave.
Yeah, sound.
You're
Well, I
into
mean,
it.
synthy. I wouldn't say
Okay.
synthwave.
Like what?
Well, I think Nick Cave is probably one of the best music composers working today. Nick Cave from the Bad Seeds. He did the Proposition soundtrack, which is one of my favorites of all time. He also did what was it? John Ford, the Coward Who Killed Jesse James. I totally butchered that, but it's the Jesse James movie with Brad Pitt playing Jesse
the
James.
assassination of
Thank
Jesse
you.
James
Thank
by
you.
the cowardly Rob Ford.
Rob Ford, thank
Okay.
you. That was good. Appreciate that. Which is a hauntingly amazing movie, but what makes it so haunting and memorable, I think, is the soundtrack, and that
yeah.
was totally Nick Cave.
Oh, yeah. I think that's one of Brad Pitt's best movies, honestly.
I would agree.
Speaking of Brad Pitt, we were talking about soundtracks
Yeah.
versus scores. And I think the soundtrack for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood kind of makes that movie. Don't you
Well,
think?
it sets the period, and it reaches back to the nostalgia, which I think is
Yeah.
something that Tarantino is excellent at doing.
Yeah. But they also did that in The Joker when there's that scene. I mean, there's controversial opinions about The Joker and if it's a good movie or not. I enjoyed it. But at the end, when they go to the chaos and it's just this shot of the cab driving down, the street filled with anarchy clowns, they go into Cream. And it's like, I saw it in the theater and I was like, oh, it's like it like pumps you up,
Yeah.
But music choices.
Yeah, I mean, if it's done intentionally to set a mood or to convey the period in time, like a Cameron Crowe film, I'm fine with known pop songs or just songs in general that
Right.
have vocal chords to it. Appearing in movies, but I don't know. Like, man, I brought it up in the conversation with Chris. That's something that I think Chris would agree to a certain extent, or at least his answer did. When I'm talking to young filmmakers, it's like, don't put that number one pop song in your film. It's going to
Right.
ruin it.
Right.
Unless it's truly inspired by genius and it totally fits the moment. You're going to screw yourself. Like, someone's going to be sitting there listening to it and they're going to think, oh man, yeah, I remember that song. I was on a date with so-and-so and she
it'll
broke
take
up with
'em-
me and screw that song. Like, there's always that.
We'll take them out of it.
Yeah. Because you as a person who's heard that song before, you cannot distance yourself from
Right.
the moment in time that you heard it. And the same thing's true for really good or iconic soundtracks. Like, if you're trying to convey menace and you're being a little campy about it, it's totally fine to put in, the dun dun dun, from the Terminator,
Yeah.
or the sound that always plays when Jaws shows up, like, because people have seen those movies, right? They're
Right.
iconic, so you immediately understand what that's supposed to mean.
Yep.
But you can't just insert that willy-nilly in a film and not have someone say, "Oh yeah, I should be watching Jaws instead of whatever trash is on the
And
screen
I think
right
it
now."
has to do with the tone of the film too. I
Totally.
think it's if it like you said, if it's more kitschy, then putting
Yeah,
that in
if it's wink
makes
wink
people-
self-aware, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I find too often that a lot of young filmmakers, it's not wink wink kitschy or campy. They're just doing it because they think it's a good idea, and it's never a good idea.
Well, like you guys are talking about horror movies and those scores, they're just interwoven with the actual scares and how people are perceiving the movie. So if you take somebody out of that, that ruins the whole vibe.
Sure, but I think Chris brought up a really good point about horror movies is sometimes the absence of sound is just as effective as a score. Right, it's what you're not hearing, and it's that isolation, and then bringing in the sound at the right moment to sell that scare. That's hugely important for a horror film. Well, with that, I think we've talked enough.
Oh yeah, we could go on and on about music from movies, but you've heard enough.
Yes. So where can they find more about us, Jessie?
We are Loose Framing Podcast. You can listen to us on Spotify, Amazon Music, watch us on YouTube, and of course, follow Film Tampa Bay at Film Tampa Bay on all social platforms.
And with that, Happy New Year's again to everybody, and we'll be back next month.
Bye now. Ta-ta.
Bye.
Yes. Well, bye.